Okay. Yeah, I'm ready to go. Can you let me know when to go?
Go.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, both here in person and online. I'm just going to begin with a land acknowledgement. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The Arc Poetry Society honors the people and the land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, as well as all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and the valuable past and present contributions to this land. My name is Maurice Bruepner, and I'm going to be your MC this evening. I'm actually very honored to be here at the spring launch for ARC's, oh goodness, sorry, 20th anniversary of the Diana Brebner Prize issue. I actually probably owe ARC a really big thank you for starting that prize 20 years ago. 20 years ago, they did what I could not. I don't actually remember much of that first year after my mother died. I don't remember Anita consulting me about the creation of this prize, although I am positive she must have talked to me about it at some point. Though I'm certain they did it with all of the best intentions, and I always trusted that. All I remember from that year was trying to hold it together to get into university and keep going. But ARC saw an opportunity, and they took it, and I remember being very glad that they had taken it. For many years, this prize has continued on without any effort on my part. And that itself has been a second blessing. When you lose someone you love, one of the worst parts, at least for me, is when no one around you remembers them. And this prize this evening proves the opposite. Diana could be a terribly logical person. She was a very tough parent at times, but she was also my marshmallow mummy. And I know that she would be so honored to have this prize named in her honor. That's a terrible sentence, sorry, Mom. And for it to have been so meaningful to so many other people as well. Not long after Diana died, I left Ottawa for about a decade in search of myself in a lot of ways, but I kept in touch with a number of Diana's friends and former students. When I finally found my way back to the NCR, Rob McLennan invited me out to an event he was hosting. That night, a number of people recognized my name and one recognized my face. It was an unexpected homecoming to a community I had never felt entirely acclaimed to. It had always been Diana's community in my mind. But it was also an enormous relief. It was proof that Diana had had an impact, that she was remembered by so many more people than I had realized. ARC is not entirely to thank for that, of course, since anyone who knew Diana personally is likely to remember her sound advice or her terrible puns, or both. But as John Barton said so bluntly in his essay on the history of this prize in this issue, prizes are established for more than simple sentimental reasons. There are often very logical reasons too. And Diana was a passionate teacher to her students, promising adults or a class of 9-year-olds, it didn't matter. I have never had a shred of doubt that she would have been pleased to help encourage new writers, or that she would have been anything less than delighted to be part of all of those writers' journeys. So at that Rob McLennan event that I attended, one of the old winners was one of the people who recognized my name, and we got talking, and she asked me whether or not anything was being done for the 20th anniversary, and this is 5 years ago now. And I had no idea. I'd never been involved with the prize before. However, a couple of months later, we were at an event again, and she made sure to introduce me to Chris Johnson. And that's basically where my participation ends, in a sense. But ARC has done such a wonderful, wonderful job compiling this issue, getting all the past winners to contribute, and compiling also essays both on Diana's writing, but also about her as a teacher and a mentor. And I can only imagine that Diana would get a little bit soft if she saw this issue. Not because, you know, a memorial issue is a big deal, yes, but one that happens 20 years later is proof of something a little bit deeper sometimes. And I think that the impact of her writing, all that she ever wanted was to write something that would be remembered, even if it didn't have her name on it. That was actually her deepest wish. So I'm so glad that tonight some of the contributors will get to share the wonderful issue with you all. And we're going to start with Anita Leahy, who is currently serving as the editor for the Best Canadian Poetry Anthology. Her latest book is The Last Goldfish, A Tale of True Friendship. And she lives in Ottawa, again, yay! So Anita, I'm not sure where you are.
I'm going to take this off. I have a lot of things, but don't be alarmed. It doesn't mean I'm going to be here for all night. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Maurice. Thanks. And thank you for suggesting that ARC do this 20th anniversary tribute for the Diana Brebner Prize, which is for a poem by an emerging Ottawa-based or Ottawa area author. I expect when John Barton comes up, he may talk a little bit more about the history of the prize. I wanted to just, before reading a smorgasbord of poems by different authors, talk a bit about the morning more than 2 decades ago when I woke up in the little house I lived in Hindenburg in Ottawa and looked out the front window. Maybe I was going out to pick up the newspaper, and there was this gleaming, mangled shopping cart sitting in the tiny postage stamp garden in front of my house. And this was remarkable because I had very recently written a poem about a shopping cart. And I was in a poetry workshop that Diana Brebner was teaching at the time. So the first thing I did was go in and call Diana and say, "You won't believe what I found on my front, in our front garden this morning." And I told her, and she listened, and she said things like, "Oh, really? Isn't that amazing?" And and she didn't say very much. And then I got off the phone, and I thought, wait a minute. And then I called her back, and she said, "Anita, I was wondering how long it was going to take you." So the shopping cart was her doing. I had missed a meeting for the workshop, I can't remember why. And when the group came out that evening, they had stumbled on this, and because of this poem that I'd recently written, apparently, Diana said, "We have to bring this to Anita." And there happened to be a woman in the program who had a pickup truck. So they picked up this shopping cart out of some alley in Old Ottawa South, or a parking lot, or wherever it was. It was the river. Okay, thank you, Una. Una should really be telling this story because she was there for the retrieval. That's Una Macdonald speaking. And they brought me the shopping cart. And this was not just some lark of Diana's. I think maybe it was a little bit, but it also was partly her way of sending a message, like the things you write are important. They can make things happen. They matter, and this is a commitment. Like you have to accept the consequences of whatever you write. And sometimes that consequence is, what do I do with this shopping cart that's now sitting on my front lawn? So that's like a very small glimpse of the person Diana was. Aside from being a remarkable poet, a very galvanizing teacher and mentor. And she, aside from questions of craft and questions of practicality, like how to organize your life as a writer, because we all know that's not an easy thing to do, she also tried to show us how to be brave. And she showed us by example, and she showed us by doing things like that. And I just want to share a few poems by some of the people who worked with her during that time, because she affected all of our lives. And I'm going to start with one of mine. So one of the things I did, aside from writing about a shopping cart, is I started thinking about the clotheslines in my neighborhood, of which there were many in those days, laden with wonderful arrays of garments, gleaming in the morning sun. And I discovered, partly through working with Diana, how writing about something like a clothesline can become much more than that and can take you to dangerous places. And there's a bit of a dangerous place that the clothesline in this poem took me to. This is called the drip dry method. An airy kiss, our fabrics come alive. Face cloths ring dances from laden rope. Your gray-haired jeans yee-haw over green tomatoes. We hunker indoors, wondering how to begin our own jig, when, for God's sake, here will be enough. Tie up the hollyhocks, prostrate, breaking their backs. Pick the peppers, fold the clothes. Weeds writhe beneath the morning glory, overgrown and slithering through the back door. Can't we spare a wooden peg to fasten our promise to that line? Please, it is you I have chosen. Keep me hinged. Assure me of this patched rug we've laid down, which fades daily in ways I don't understand. What we do for love. I would gladly be wrung, hung, bash myself against walls of humid air. We need an honest soaking, then the pegs, the windy harvest dance, you and I wrestling with all that ripens and blows between our seams. That's from my first book, Out to Dry in Cape Breton, which is from a very long time ago now. And much of the work in that book was my apprenticeship that began working with Diana Brebner. And another poet poet and story writer who worked with Diana is Leslie Buxton, who now lives in BC. And she, at the time, Ottawa used to put poems on the bus. I don't know if anyone remembers that. And I'm going to read you Leslie's poem that used to ride around the city of Ottawa on the bus. And it was a poem that came out of her time working with Diana. And it's a poem for her daughter. It's called India, My Daughter. And this also goes to a place that takes some bravery, and it's the idea of having to let go of your child and let them be themselves and have their own existence. In front of the purple dinosaur, you kiss me, smack on the lips, then gallop away. Abandoned to dust bunnies, I follow scattered crackers. wanting another kiss. I find you in a place that has seen cleaner days. We drink tea from tiny clay cups. Then you find him, soft fellow with the sea in his eyes. You drag him with love by the fin. And there's the little, I found this in my, the trans poetry chapbook. That's an artifact. Next, another poet who worked closely with Diana and now lives in Toronto is Lehmann. And she has published a book called The Winter Count several years ago, and it's very much, it partly relates to a great uncle of hers who was tasked with, believe it or not, assessing the sanity of Louis Riel. And in her research regarding her uncle's history, she came to begin to reckon with our colonial history and the history of the country. And this book is full of characters from that historical time, some imagined, some real. And it's a very brave book. And the poem I'm going to read, Dilys told me when she wrote it, she also had in mind knowledge of some difficult things Diana lived through in her early life that had to do with abuse, and which in an essay in Arc with the poem Port, Una Macdonald writes about. And Dilys said she was thinking about the idea of going past victimhood when she wrote this poem. And it's called Just Call Me the Filly from Moosomin. And the character is Isabel Stocks. They prefer broncos, a native breed purchased from a company whose name escapes me. Saddle horses of strong constitution, docile and hardy, able to withstand these prairie hardships. Myself, I prefer the harder bit, bleeding in the corners of my mouth, the whip's sweet song when gentlemen hold me down, so I'll shudder when the hot iron chisels my flank, a valentine or someone's initials. Ooh, the lilt of sonnets soaked in whiskey, gunmetal flash to my ear, old oats leaching dust in the dark of a father's room. The house roaring its biblical rites as it crawls from flames, lit by the match of these, my averted eyes. I imagine Selkirk Asylum in October, the soft pink bellies of doctors, the guards' handsome, broad-faced backs. And the next poem in this gathering is by Una Macdonald, who's here with us tonight because she does still live in the area. And it too, on that theme of bravery, goes to a scary place. And this is has to do with reckoning with being adopted and what that feels like as you move through your life, the disconnection and sort of feeling like there's two selves, two families, and I won't try and explain your poem anymore, Una. The other thing that is interesting here is Diana wrote a lot of ekphrastic poetry. I'm going to read from that next. And this is an ekphrastic poem related to artwork by Betty Goodwin. And it has an epigraph from a book called The Psychological Birth of the Human Infant. I'm going to read the epigraph and then the title and then the poem, just so we're flowing with the title. It's the biological birth of the human infant and the psychological birth of the individual are not coincident in time. Grieving knife. If there is an edge to this, I want to run my palm along its steel sharpness. Let blood pool and gather until I can float. An embryo with no cord but my own small yearning. Somewhere there is an ancient song. Its rhythms live in skin. Its slow strum, a choke-throated awe, knotted in my tongue, warming words in my mouth, but never speaking. Will I ever sing me? I have been given away. Grief follows the lost child with a stalker's grace. His knife at my throat exacts its price, one family for another. I take the blade, and in its glint, see my own fractured reflection. Feel its cold metal weight in my hand. When I have it, I use it. With a wretched precision, I tell my first self, you are not real, of earth or born. Here, I say, cut here. I am blessedly exact. Conclusions are satisfying, but bloody. And with that isn't evidence of a great teacher. I don't know what is. Thank you for letting me read that, Una. It's a very powerful poem. And I'm going to read the poem I wrote about for this issue of ARC. It's from Diana's series 11 Paintings by Mary Pratt, which won the CBC Poetry Prize in I forget what year, but many years ago. You're going to tell 1992, 93, something like that. These are some of my favorite poems of all time. They're very difficult and beautiful poems and relate to, in part, the struggle Diana had when she was dealing with cancer and cancer treatments. And but they all relate to these paintings by Mary Pratt that look on the surface like domestic scenes, at first sort of harmless, and Diana knew that there was nothing harmless in any domestic scene, and that comes through in these poems. The really nice thing about this issue of ARC is it reprints a suite of these Mary Pratt paintings, which is wonderful. So this is called Eggs in an Egg Crate. After the great debate over whether it is called an egg carton or a crate, according to the dictionary, being made of wooden slats, I've decided to call it a container and get on with it. Who cares what a thing is called when, after all, we all know what it is? And we might also question whether they are even eggs, being empty, or are they merely shells, remains of what eggs might have become? And even here we encounter the question of fertility. For was there ever a chance that these might have become the living creatures that we hope for? I think of the children we have lost, the ones we choose not to have, and those born dead or dying. A baby boy, alive to the end, then stillborn, the only one with red hair like his father's. And another child, the firstborn, so deformed and broken that even his mother can now call death a blessing. And all the children we bore who did not survive, but are remembered. Into what fragile containers we are thrust, each made of love, biology, and dust. What little coffins we create from wooden slats, and oh, what delicate bodies we cremate. Now, with the words said, tears shed, we carry on, celebrate birthdays, cracking the perfect eggs one at a time for an extravagant cake. The glistening shells, small bodies that we break. I'm going to leave you with one far more recent poem to hopefully prove that I haven't forgot what I learned all those years ago. This is from a suite of poems I started writing that relate to a wildfire that burned through the village in Cape Breton where my father grew up and where my grandparents lived in 1976 when I was 4 years old. And by today's standards, it was a quaint event with regards to wildfire experiences. Nobody died. Many people did lose their homes. And what's interesting, given that it was so much smaller than what's happening, is how the after effects still linger. And I've spent my entire life hearing stories about this fire and things that happened in the aftermath, and seeing its effects, and seeing also the regrowth that followed. So I'm just going to read you the beginning of a suite called Bird's Eye View, which is kind of a riff on one of those local columns where people write in and say what birds they've seen in their backyard or while they're walking around the village or the town. There used to be a little monthly thing called the Lewisburg Seagull, and they had a column called Bird's Eye View. But this is the bird's eye view in my imagination from right after the fire. So I'm going to read you just two short pieces from that. Lucy Mountain of Wadden's Lane reports the cawing turned her head. A telltale silhouette atop a spruce in the ditch. I'm going to show you the crow in this poem, which is, I don't know if you can see, maybe online people can see. This is drawn by the artist Pauline Conley for this beautiful chapbook by Baseline Press. So, Lucy Mountain of Wadden's Lane reports the cawing turned her head. A telltale silhouette atop a spruce in the ditch. The tree was one of a few still standing that far up the road, branches burnt to nubs, bark black as crow. The bird's teardrop shape on that distant branch Lucy took as a sign the fire was out this time for real. But mercy, the racket, and that charred, lonesome spruce. Like a ghost, she said, a ribbon of cinders. She couldn't help hearing those caw, caw, caws as a soul calling out. Anguish is a word she used. Alarm, alarm, alarm. And then I'll read you the barn swallows. They're really wonderful, if anyone wants to come and see them up close later. The barn swallows huddled in the eaves at Elias Gallant's have welcomed refugees. The flapping and rustling have increased tenfold. You wouldn't believe the commotion up there, Elias writes. The cheeping commences at 4 a.m. When Elias leaves for the wharf, they attack from the lintel. Churi, bombs away. Elias believes the birds are trying to put out the fire. They make him think of water bombs, which he wishes had tumbled by the dozen out of helicopters that awful Sunday. No one can fathom the ministry's reasoning. Manitou wasn't worth saving, we suppose. That burnt smell that singes your nose with every breath has the swallows on high alert. The very air is infused with disaster. Anything in motion is a threat. Thank you for listening. And
Our next reader has her fingers in so many pies, I couldn't even keep track when I was trying to figure out what to say this evening. She writes academically, creatively, and also is involved with a number of projects throughout Ontario and I think in BC also. She published 2 chapbooks in 2021 with Katie Staubart, The Trick to Feeling Safe at Home, and Worry and Fuck. And she is this year's winner of the Diana Brebner Prize. Please welcome Dessa Bayrock.
It feels dirty to take my mask off, but I'm going to do it anyway. Thank you for coming here, you brave souls who have braved the second convoy. I was very grateful to be awarded the Diana Brebner Prize this year. I was saying before we started that I haven't really been submitting poems or writing poems even really since COVID, and so this was a really lovely affirmation of the craft that has been in a fallow period for me for quite some time. I'm going to start with one of Diana's poems. It's called Pictures of an Eclipse. And then I have 2 sad poems, one of which is my award-winning poem, which is a crazy phrase to come out of my mouth, but I'm going with it. And then I'm going to end on a hopeful poem as a treat. Pictures of an Eclipse. What I have are pictures of an eclipse taken against counsel in the sun before the darkened minutes held time still and I became a girl to be undone. Then I knew power and held it to my face. The camera eye looked straight into the fire and saw 2 shining creatures, and then one, the great corona, and a blazing pyre. See the black palette on the sun, there for a moment, praised, mourned a little, and then gone. Daughter, what shadow moves across your face? The telescope holds Saturn, and you see the rings, the colors, the planet's little light, and then M31, Andromeda, is caught, and a man says, to see her in the sky, you must look sideways to where you know she's not. Practice eye aversion, and you'll see the gray smudge. Not one star, a nation of stars. What remains there are floating out in the heavens. I have no picture of their ancestors. I give you these. I took them when I believed no light could hurt me. Little ember, now I burn, and know better. Great poem. The poem that won the prize last year is called Caitlin Invites Me to a Party, which I wrote last spring, the first time somebody invited me to a party, which felt just wild after a year of never seeing anybody. And I didn't go to this party because I was very nervous, as I imagine many of us are nervous. But I did write a poem about it and sent it to Caitlin, which is maybe why people don't invite poets to parties. Caitlin invites me to a party. I roll the word party around in my mouth like an unripe rose hip. I take myself for a walk, find a cicada bunched up in what's left of its skin. It crawls out mint green, pale pink, and leaves the shell of its own self behind, ghostly. Rose hips, too, I think, are ghosts, although I'm never sure if rose hips are the thing that come before or after the rose. I know at some point, sometimes, wasps crawl into them, maybe for food or shelter or a party. A party. The last party I went to was 2 springs ago, 2 crawlings of cicadas, 2 swellings and burstings of blossoms. It feels dim now, the memory of it wrapped up in the buzz, the hum, the voices crowded into Caitlin's apartment before it was painted pale pink, before the breakup split it like a rose hip. Seeds must spill from something like that, right? Something new must emerge. I watch the cicada crawl out of itself, go nowhere, harden up as quickly as it can in the bright air, but me, I am still soft. The petals that come before the hardening. The cicada still shivering like a nymph. This next one I also wrote last spring. Sorry, it's kind of a COVID poem. It's called The Future is a Fairy Tale Land That Exists Only in Our Heads. I haven't performed this one anywhere or shared it with anyone, so Thank you for being a gentle audience in advance. The future is a fairy tale land that exists only in our heads. Last year, when we thought this would all be over in a matter of weeks, I threw myself into collage of all things, into the stack of National Geographics toppling in slow motion from the bedroom shelf. For hours I worked as though possessed, as though meditating, as though my life depended on it. On one spread, the head of a deer, the glint of something blue behind the window. The page opposed, all red, hellish really, curling around a man hanging by his feet. The future is a fairy tale land that exists only in our heads, one caption reads. At least, I think. I barely remember them now. The only word I know for sure is tragedy. Tragedy, just like that in all caps, cut out from some headline in the 80s. It must have fallen behind the desk in that long ago spring. Remember the spring? It is spring again now, impossible but true, and Reese kicks tragedy out from under the desk with his slippered feet. It lays there on the bedroom floor, exposed and vulnerable for days. We walk over tragedy to get laundry, to carry coffee, to dress ourselves, to sleep. Tragedy lays there like a ghost, the last reminder of last spring's collages, filed haphazardly now in the closet, a metaphor so fertile you could stuff anything into it. This strange repeated spring, the echoes of our loss, so many dead. And this word tragedy, scuffed and weary underfoot, which can't even begin to fill it. Okay, and now here's the hopeful one. This one I wrote for my friend Scott, who speaks ASL, American Sign Language. And there is some ASL in this poem, so I'm going to try and do both. We'll see if this works. Let's maybe tip it this way a little bit. Okay. It's called Same, Same. Scott's hands flash from across the bar. Nachos, he signs, with chicken, salsa on the side. I can't always understand Scott's hands, but he teaches me the words for cupcake, excuse me, ACAB. He teaches me more than one word for same, same. The pointer fingers on each hand coming together between us, like the words for boots, shoes, stars. Or else the pinkies and the thumbs spread and the fingers curled down, and Scott's hands shifting back and forth between us. Same, same. Your heart, my heart. Something ineffable, ephemeral between us, within us. Same, same. I love the flash of Scott's hands, so like a voice, so like a flag, so like magic in the far air where I stand at the bar to order our next round. Barking squirrel, Scott signs, the terrible beer we both somehow love, and the distance between us is nothing. Once I spread my hands in a word that looks like nothing so much as love, doubling between us, and tell him, same, same. Thank you.
I lost track of the order of operations. This is a handy list. It's very nice. Thank you very much. Our next speaker won the 14th Diana Brebner Prize in 2015, was also the finalist for the 2018 National Magazine Award, is the author of Observing the Moon, and will have a second poetry collection forthcoming from Brick Books in 2023. Please welcome Sneha Mahathen. I think I messed that up, I'm sorry. Oh gosh, I even asked earlier. To the stage, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to ARC and the International Writers Festival and everyone for coming and everyone who's watching at home. I'm honored to be here to celebrate ARC's spring issue and pay tribute to Diana Brebner. The first poem I'm going to read is one of Diana's, Bioluminescence. I come to you with this luminous heart, It wasn't always transparent or glowing. Now I shine in the dark like a primitive fish, radiant life form. Bioluminescence is such a big word for what has happened. Perhaps it comes from drinking the water. Nothing is safe anymore when I know you can look right through me. It is nice, though, to shine like a nuclear clock at night. You find your way to my green delight, bask in the radiance of my affection. I loved this issue of ARC to be able to read all of the Diana Brebner Prize winning poems together, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to share my poem, Rosa Parks, with you, which won the prize in 2015. Rosa Parks. The day her body was laid out for viewing, I was getting nothing useful done, so I left work early and drove downtown. The line of people wound all around the Museum of African American History. I wouldn't get to see her. The wait would be hours. I'd brought no coins to feed a meter, and there was nowhere else to park. A man approached to offer me all the change in his pockets. I'll always have fond memories of Detroit. I have a few newer poems I'd like to share. This one was inspired by the month my family spent on Prince Edward Island. Sea glass. I wonder if I'll ever grow accustomed to the smell of the ocean. Ancient salt tang startling me afresh every morning as I walk along bunches of gray-black seaweed that mark tide's highest reaches, on sand rusted red and pebbled with broken quahog, clam, and mussel shells. I find a crab claw lost by its owner, and strangely, a lone ant crawling over tiny tracks left by snails' single feet. A dragonfly tumbles, uncontrolled it seems, in the breeze. Snail shells crunch underfoot, avoiding them is impossible on the rocks. And across the harbor, I glimpse the flash of the Point Prim light, so feeble a gleam from here. I've promised my children some shoreline treasures, but they don't want perfect shells or stones smoothed by the waves. Alchemy of salt and sand, water and wind. Since we arrived on this island, what they prize most is sea glass. What will I find half buried on the beach? A frosted nugget of cornflower blue, once a bottle of milk of magnesia. Remnants of thin-walled fire grenades in green, amber, or aqua. Precious red colored with gold, yellow that glows green under black light, or the dark cobalt blue of a century-old bottle of poison. The basic recipe for glass, silica, soda, and lime, has remained unchanged since ancient times. Decades of beer and soda bottles, once sand themselves, return to sand. I turn back, empty-handed, to return to our rented cottage. This harbor, a haven for humble creatures. There is no place untouched by humans on this earth. The next poem I want to share, I wrote after a walk on the Ottawa River one fall day when the water was low enough to be able to walk on fossil stromatolites on the shore. Stromatolites are layered rock deposits formed by cyanobacteria, which are also responsible for the buildup of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere 2 million or so years ago. Stromatolites. Come walk with me on the oldest record of life on Earth. This is how the ancients thrived for eons, accreting sediment, releasing oxygen. When I was your age, my father used to say, I studied by village streetlight. Against his father's wishes, he went for education instead of work. When, in defiance of their lineage, Microbes began to photosynthesize. Did they dream of descendants one day setting root in land? Energized by sunlight, cyanobacteria transformed the atmosphere. In living layers on top of deposited rock, they readied the world for us. My parents moved from the tropics to a country of snow. I took in their careful pronunciations and exhaled unburdened syllables. Fossilization makes the passing permanent. We carry our memories in stone. Children everywhere fill their pockets with rocks. Not far from my home, the river recedes every summer to reveal ringed remnants of long-gone bodies, solid as dreams and warmed by the sun. The last poem of mine that I'll read is actually the most recent poem that I've written. It starts with an epigraph from Harry Thurston, which reads, "One story is as good as another, and we all must come from somewhere." Origin story. My mythology has two sources, Catholic elementary school and my mother, which is to say, my childhood was charmed. In the beginning, there was darkness. In the beginning, there was a 1,000-headed snake floating on an endless ocean. If I had struggled with infinity, I would not have survived. Our house had a prayer room with dozens of pictures of Hindu gods. I penciled corrections in my hardcover of children's Bible stories. Oh, the music, the hymns at church, the bhajans at home, the sacred words of slokams and mass. It was religion, I think, that made me a writer. My teachers asserted that rising from the dead was not the same as reincarnation. My mother taught me that all religions were equivalent. My dad shared a birthday with Jesus. Sister Evansha insisted on perfect handwriting. Everything was connected in my mind, the mysteries and details of the world. My father taught me chemistry and math, but it was my mother, I think, who drew me to science. How else could I begin to explain what I knew but could not say? I'm going to end with another poem of Diana Brebner's. Strangers and Exiles on the Earth. I'm still not used to it. Walking the surface of planets, inhabiting skins, having to learn how to love from within a body. Of course, it is only as much body as we let it be. Still, I'd give anything for wings again, or the erotic thrill of transformation. Here will abide time, discover the primitive delights a mind allows us. Of course, wings are not really the point. As it is, I can hardly keep my feet on the ground. It's so easy to forget. We are the visitors to this world, strangers and exiles on the earth, not meant for belonging. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Nuatio. I'm one of the co-founders of QUART, which is Ottawa Queer Arts Collective, and it's really an honor and a beautiful evening, and I'm really glad we could be part of this. I'd like to take some time to thank the Ottawa International Writers Festival, Mike Kay and Eric, the technical team, and the Writers Festival team, and also our Arc Poetry magazine for putting together this beautiful edition, issue 97, and allowing us as QUART to be part of this tribute to Diana Brebner. This is Ensemble Allure, and I'd like to introduce the members. Renee Dawn is playing viola. Eric Johnson-Sugar is on violin. Ben Borg is playing guitar. And Stephen Eckert is playing piano, who is also the composer of the works you're going to hear. Quart is really proud and really happy we were able to commission works to be part of this evening and to celebrate the poetry of both John Barton and of Diana Brebner. And we look forward to more collaborations with you. And so thank you for allowing us to be part of this. And now I'm going to ask Mira to come back up and introduce our next speaker, and enjoy what you hear next. Thank you.
Our last speaker this evening is a name that I've known since I was very young. I honestly don't remember not knowing his name. The interesting thing is sometimes you know the name of someone who's important to someone in your life, but you don't actually know that person very well yourself. So I hope that I will be able to rectify that in the coming years, but for now, he remains a bit of an illusion. He joined the ARC board in 1988. He was co-editor from 1990 until 2003, helped establish the Diana Brebner Prize, and then moved to Victoria, where he was editor of the Malahat Review from 2004 until 2018. His 12th book, Lost Family, a memoir, was nominated for the 2021 Derek Walcott Prize. And he is going to share, I believe, some of his own work and some of Diana's work with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming John Barton.
Thank you, Maurice. Feels like an unveiling. So, what you're about to hear will be two of my poems, which Stephen has orchestrated, and one poem by Diana that they've also will perform. And the two poems of mine are drawn from Lost Family and from a section of the book called Coda for the Victims, which Quart, thanks to Glenn, is going to turn into a larger musical work. And this is what you're about to hear will be the first two pieces that have actually seen to come to light. So I guess we'll start with Life Drawing. Life Drawing. To lay down one line and find a likeness, the body caught in a single gesture. Expression in the touch. The skin tone chalk held loosely, lightly, the slightest pressure lent into, from the shoulder, a movement through elbow, wrist to fingers, paper looked away from, not at. fresh as thought, dormant, knowing, called forth, not trespassed, chance mistook for fate, fate for chance. As what's found is joined by more lines, body static in time lapse, what the skin hides implied, not purloined, but worked out. Each drawing a capsule forgotten until lifted from the vault. What's seen in it when laid flat, not faultless. So the next poem, I thought I'd just give you a few notes on. It's called My Ackerley Myself, and J.R. Ackerley was a British writer who was born at the end of the 19th century and died in 1970, and became a friend of E.M. Forster, and a lifelong friend. And he published in almost every genre, from poetry to drama to fiction to memoir. And he was also the poetry editor of The Listener. And I think the thing you have to remember about that generation is that they grew up knowing what happened to Oscar Wilde and how that would have affected them through their lives. My Ackerley Myself. You were the most genial man he'd met, Forster said. A new friend, decades older, your height and Spartan gaze making you bold. One-time prisoner of war who kept shirt-lifting guardsmen in the damp shadows near Marble Arch. Your wash and wear candor, ill-fitting payment, unlike the stature of your poetry, the cleanness of your prose. You always came too early, excitement or fear, no anodyne, man satisfied. Gratification disrobed, not the point. A dog while you walked on the embankment in your last abstinent years wrote its life, which I've read and cannot forget or won't. And the next poem, which is by Diana, is called Snow Angels. And I have a personal connection to this poem, sort of by chance. Diana dedicated this poem to me. And when we first met in the late 80s, she was very impressed by the fact that I had studied with one of her heroes, Joseph Brodsky, the Russian emigre poet, who came to America in the 70s as an exile and taught at Columbia University, where I studied for a short time. And I think for Diana it was 2 degrees of separation. And so it has an epigraph, which I think is important to read, which is, in white camouflage, like Finnish marksmen, from Joseph Brodsky's To Urania. Snow angels. They come across snow, white and camouflaged, and from our point of disadvantage, who can tell what they mean? Or even what color they are. Beneath snow robes, wings, feathers, the primitive coverings, weighing their light bodies down. Friend, I hope you have seen at least one up close. No more terror in that than in white, marauding bears with their fanged cavities, black and blood, red, naturally seeking you, food, never victims. Snow angels come across darkness, you see them at their best, holy ghosts of their kind. Maybe they are as lost as we can be in snow. Something deep and hungry swallows them, and in the shaped holes we find remains some celestial parts and a last message, desperate, marked in the snow. Thank you. Thank you. The Ensemble Allure. I learned how long a second was. I learned how to count more slowly. I also just wanted to mention that people who knew Diana and saw her perform often, will remember that she sometimes performed with a guitarist playing in the background, Greg Banoff. So in a way, Stephen structured the piece to echo that with having a band play the guitar. So I thought I'm going to read a few poems. Some of them are older. And as I was thinking about tonight, suddenly occurred to me I should read the poem that I wrote about Joseph Brodsky and the experience of being his student, which was one of the more intimidating things in my life. Being in the presence of a man of that caliber and of that brilliance. We were all terrified. So this poem is based on an anecdote that he told us about his coming to America. And after Auden, W.H. Auden, who was his favorite poet, Robert Frost was another, and we spent a lot of time. I took a course. The course I took with him was a course on lyricism. And basically, he showed us how each of the poets we studied, Frost being one, how we moved from word to word, line to line. It transformed how I wrote. The crisis of lyricism. His neighbor frozen before her white garage door, glinting in the withdrawn Michigan sunlight, a foretaste of snow. Brodsky before us in the classroom, telling stories. The allegory of how he came to understand Frost as America's foremost poet of terror. Newly exiled from Russia and teaching in Ann Arbor, this scruffy, brutally sensitive man, 10 years later, lounging before us, chain-smoking Marlboros, pausing between haphazard puffs, Take 5 vented down through the floorboards from some dimensionless practice room above. The national anthem of whatever United States, it doesn't matter which, according to Brodsky, liberty, more or less an improvisation ever since he first heard Brubeck jamming under the stars in Sickle Moon in Leningrad, the ember of Joseph's cigarette leading us toward the blank face of his argument. A woman frozen before her garage door for almost 10 minutes without hoisting it open, shedding no light on the clutter within. I found myself imagining chainsaws, bicycles, the Toyota idling in the trance of exhaust, waiting to be let in, the garage door blazing against the deluge of vermilion and harvest, the empty maples about her, a clutch of children ready to be taken away by the school bus. I pictured Brodsky opening his living room blinds to watch the voyeurism that is neighborliness, that is art. For all I know, she cut the demeanor of a mannequin modeling slacks at JCPenney, fallen leaves artfully displayed at her feet. Brodsky watching her consider what can be merely guessed at, something stories can only find words for. Bicycle, perhaps, or chainsaw, the word Toyota waiting to be let in. Or will anyone really believe that? In today's version, the woman might well hoist the door open 20 years later, is about to drive into humors too private to grasp. Adjusting the rear view mirror, who does she see loitering at the end of her driveway? If she had any brains, she'd throw the car into reverse without thinking and floor it. Have I kept her idling against her will? And what about Brodsky, goose-fleshed by that cool and stateless autumn mapped inside Frost's America? Who is able to speak? The next poem I'm going to read is actually a poem I wrote for Diana that appears in my book Polari. And that book is mostly poems written in various set forms. And I wrote this poem after reading or rereading the Ishtar Gate, Diana's new and unpublished poems, or last poems, which was edited by Stephanie Bolster, another one of the people that she mentored. And there's an essay at the back that Diana wrote, which I know influenced this poem, and I've been trying for the life of me to remember exactly what. But I think it was more the idea of the work projecting the path ahead, even past into after death. And I have an epigraph from one of her poems, one of Diana's poems, which is, "All I ever wanted was to stay alive and be happy." Into the wild. She beached her green canoe in calm white water and sat back on shore, her face angled to dusk. A door blew open in the woods, a bomb she walked through, branches still in leaf, backpack light for agile passage. No threat of return, her vantage from high ground untraced on relief maps she'd ceased to read. The cosmos she hoped to chart unproven here, but her eyes, trained to let appear the left unseen, at last were glassed transparent. A faint wind flared through leaves loosely gold. Songbirds fell still, not one followed the diurnal glint of what she'd set free, dropped to rushed undergrowth. A fading shaft laid to rest among ornate ferns. Time, its foreshadowing in words she'd portage, a quick, steady craft she could shoulder. The rock-scored prow without anchor or figurehead. Higher she climbed, farther she thread, shade in her wake through rain-swept boughs. And I guess one of the reasons I chose sort of the landscape of that poem is so many of Diana's poems are about being out in the natural world, canoeing and walking and observing. The next poem I'm going to read is a Sento. And a Sento is a poem constructed of lines from another poet. And the poet whose lines I've appropriated are Carolyn Forshay's from her poem Blue Hour, which is this 40-page poem, and it's an abecedarian poem. And what that means is that the lines, the beginning letter of each line is from A to Z in the alphabet, so A, B, 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 B. And so because it's 40 pages, there's a series of lines that all start with the letter A and then all the way through to Z. And so my poem as a Sento is also abecedarian in that all my lines, I only have 26 because I have a line from each of her multiple lines for each letter. And the title is also a line from the poem, which I probably will mispronounce because it's French. But the title is Le Musée Hypothétique, the Hypothetical Museum. Apparition in a vacant house, blue lobelia rising along the gate, city through the filth of a bus window, down a desert road aerially strafed. Each page a window intact until touched, from a gloved hand a flaming bottle. Ground fog rising from a graveyard. History decaying into images. I remember standing next to his bed, journey that will have no end. Keepsake, knell, Kiri, lighted prayer sacks sent down river to console. Meaning did not survive that loss of sequence. Near the lake where the fireweed was, one sees and is seen approaching the other with empty hands, present, though most often invisible. Question after question rises as wet smoke. So this is how the past begins. Tedium taught me an imaginary world under the blind sky's surveillance, vesture, vigil, light, votive, writing, an anguished wind. X does not equal your light narrow coffin, 0. So, another poem about a museum. And it's a sonnet. Some of you may know that I have been obsessed with the sonnet. This book is all sonnets. There's about 150 of them, and I have about 250 other sonnets that I have been picking at and revising, and this is one that I've just revised. I open up the files, they're all sitting on my computer, and I look at the file names. I don't remember that file name. I open up the file, and I thought, I don't remember this poem. And it sort of feels like I have my own set of paint by numbers. And I just reassemble. So this poem is called Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, 1990. It happened so rarely. Monet's series, after years apart, put back on display, ordered as painted. You, me, lined up, grays before sunrise breaking into cerise as we edged past, near invisibly paused for seconds, our faces shining in response to noon's heat draining while day pushed us west. Haystacks moist with dusk, cathedrals chalky with starlight fierce enough to wash away facades tumbling us in shadow, freeze-framed as if by Polaroids moved from entrance to exit, momentary yet strangers to each other less, love's impasto claimed to last, ending, but leaving us entranced. So, the next poem I'm going to read is also quite old, and it came back to mind to me when Russia invaded Ukraine, and it brought back that feelings of the early 80s when I was a young adult of constantly thinking that the bomb was going to drop and that you lived under the specter of that fear, and with Russia, with Vladimir Putin threatening nuclear war again, it just brought it all back to me. And when I was a student in New York, I shared a room with another person, a stranger to me, and I was doing a master's in poetry, and he was enrolled in the Institute of Strategic Arms Studies. And he, in the evenings, would explain deterrence theory to me. And he passionately believed in it and thought it was going to save the world, and it just seemed very surreal. And so I wrote this poem kind of in response to that experience, and the title I need to explain, which is SALT Talks. And SALT is an acronym for Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And there were a series of, summits between the President of the United States and the leader of the Soviet Union, where they would try and, cut back the number of weapons. And so this poem came back to me. I wrote it in 1983, and it feels relevant again today, and made me realize that we have thought, when the wall came down, in the West we were arrogant enough to think social democracy had triumphed. Well, all through this time, of course, they've been playing this game of deterrence all along. Salt talks. The text is disarming, mysteriously discreet as it lists from its hard silo somewhere in South Arizona, lifts up near Stratford-on-Avon, near Moose Jaw or Bremen, lifts above Aix-en-Provence. It carries reasonable allowance for error towards Odessa, Riga, or Moscow, slips clean through the mind's frayed net of radar, its image striking awe on either side of the Urals. A mother takes her child one more time down to the beach, and then again, pointing out each shadow. The clouds burn into the glassy Black Sea, draining like a breast south through Hell's Gate. An old man drying into chaff struggles with details of war, the ranks of his comrades so long ago, their faces misshapen, a grandson at his bedside writing down names, a hot wind lifting the foolscap out of his lap. Lovers linger a touch longer each night along the length of the Volga, each leaf savored, each leaf an explosion of yellows and reds drifting, widely drifting. That men and women make love all over Russia is part of the strategy. Listening to the missile singing epithalamiums over their heads, the intendant hurry home from the food lines through the permanent cold of a winter Murmansk. Once over the threshold, they fall out of their clothes into the eternal warmth of their beds, their bodies melting into sleep, absolved of original sin. It is agreed at this point the good men of the Kremlin will send push-button Thanksgiving to America, Canada, Great Britain, and France. It is October 18th, 1700 hours Greenwich Mean Time in New York. We settle into our weekly debate on aesthetics. Somewhere over Ellesmere, two missives are meeting in an embrace. And I Googled that date, October 18th, and yes, that's the date of the workshop. It was a Tuesday. And we met at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So this is the last poem I'm going to read. And it's a new poem, and it's also inspired by another poet, Ezra Pound. And it's in a station of the Metro, which in its entirety is the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. In a station of the Kyiv Metro. A ghost sitting on the crowded platform beside the train cars, bedded down with children. You post your petal face on Instagram before signal grows dim, phone not plugged in, back against concrete, cross-legged on tile, tacky with bottled water and canned goods, neighbors dividing them scarcely less pale than you, trees on streets above yet to bud and may not flower against the drifting plumes, shells fired in waves from Belarus stencil across your emptied tower block, living room gaping through walls partway sloughed, guts reduced to landfill, sun's face saved to Pinterest, petal among petals, smudged by what lasts. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Arc Poetry Magazine, thank you to all of our performers tonight. Thank you to Ensemble Allure, to John Barton, to Sneha, Matvan Reese, and to Dessa Bayrock, and Anita Leahy. Tomorrow's the last day of National Poetry Month, and I know that I, for one, am going to be thinking about all of the poems that we heard tonight, as well as the music, and it's going to be a really wonderful way to end off this month. Of course, this event wouldn't have been possible without my collaborators at Quart and at the Ottawa International Writers Festival and their excellent technical support, making us sound good and streaming us to our audience at home. Thank you so much to everyone who is watching us. ARC is also funded by the City of Ottawa, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts. They help us put things like this together, and we're extremely grateful. I don't think I have anything else to say except read some poetry, be safe, be healthy, and be well. Have a good night.